Excited you're here today on the Gill Athletics Connections podcast. We're going to go around the world today. Help me welcome the Athletics Performance Manager of Queensland Academy of Sport, Mr. Steve Rippon. Steve, how are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, nice to be on the podcast with you.
Isn't technology amazing? Like it's when we're recording this, it's 6 o'clock at night for us here in Illinois. What time is it there in Australia?
It's 9 o'clock in the morning. So minus 15 hours. You guys are 15 hours behind us. It's crazy stuff.
So you can predict the future? Like you already know what's like stock markets or anything? Any stock tips for me? I could use it.
Bit of insider trade, and I can tell you who won the football game on the weekend.
Yeah, there we go. I need a lot. I'm in a college football pick'em with John Gadina, and I'm just getting my butt handed to me. So trust me, I need all of the help I can get. And by the way, it's not Gadina who's beating me. He's also on the bottom of this this list. He just happens to run the league, and we're just getting trashed there. So Steve, mainly our audience here is from America, right? And so we know the American system as far as, college or age group track and field and high school track and field, and then college. And then we know less of, but, we know it's out there is the elite level, the groups of coaches and their athletes that are running for different shoe companies and things like that, striving for US championships, Olympics, etc. We probably don't know a lot about other countries' systems. So I introduced you as the Athletics Performance Manager of Queensland Academy of Sport. What does that mean? What the heck does that mean, man? What do you do? What does that involve for track and field?
Sure. Yeah. So we have a government-backed program here in Australia. So, a lot of people don't realize, Australia's made up of 7 different states. So we have the national government, then we have the state government. So the Queensland Academy of Sport is funded by the state government, but Athletics Australia is funded by the national government. So Athletics Australia has a funding system which we call Nas Funding, where we categorise our athletes on their potential to win medals at Olympic and World Championships. So within that program, there's probably 120 athletes around Australia. And then within Queensland, there's about 32, or there's exactly 32 athletes in that funding program. So it's my job to manage those 32 athletes that are based in Queensland. And then then the service provision comes from the Queensland Academy of Sport. So all of their sports medicine, sports science, facility access is provided here by the state government. So I'm the link between the national governing body, the regional state institute, and coordinating all of their kind of programs.
So where are these 32 athletes that you help oversee? Where are they coming from? And what I mean by that is, are they coming up through like a high school and collegiate system, or is it club all the way through? How are they identified? How do they get into it? How do they get up to this level to be overseen with our, with I don't want to call them sponsorship dollars, but support system from Athletics Australia?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it's very different here from America, where you have a very much a high school and college-based system. Here, our system is much more club-based with private coaches. There's still a very strong high school athletics program, and a lot of the schools have high. Today is the big private school, the top 10 private schools in Brisbane have their carnival today, which is kind of like a big event, but it's still different from US systems. So those kind of kids will have private coaching with private clubs, and so we don't delve too deep. I'm not involved in talent development. I'm kind of, once an athlete is identified as being on that pathway to Olympic medal, then we kind of pick them up and then we start to work with them and their coaches. So for instance, out of the 32 I look after, there's probably only about 3 that are juniors. And so one of those is a 19-year-old girl running 400 meters, for instance. I've got another 19-year-old boy running 400, but they're exceptional. So they would be potential world junior medalists. So they're already at a very high level before we start to assist them.
And, I've known you for quite a while now as a pole vault coach. What are you doing as the overall as the performance manager with those coaches, and what events are we talking about? Like where do they kind of skew to here?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I mean, yes. My background is coaching, high jump, pole vault, and decathlon. That's where I started out, as a track and field coach. As you kind of work your way through the system, I've got a lot more into performance management. So performance management is very generic in a big federation. So I manage anything from hammer throwers to race walkers to sprinters, because there's a lot of generic things about the daily training environment, the DTE we call it, what kind of things a top level athlete needs in place. So it's not my job to give the hammer thrower technical input, but we have a structure here in Australia. We have event group leads in all of the events. So for instance, I did a meeting the other week, a post-Tokyo review meeting with our race walker. So I had our national race walking coach on the line via Zoom. We had 8 people in the meeting. So there was myself, the performance manager, the athlete, the personal coach. We had the strength and conditioning coach also in the room, our biomechanist, our exercise physiologist, our nutritionist. So there's a big team around one athlete. So we do a big kind of brainstorming debrief, what's happened in the last 12 months, what do we need to move forward, to either make that athlete more successful or replicate the success they've just had. So that's the kind of infrastructure we put around our elite athletes as we're trying to get the most out of them.
Is that typical? You mentioned roughly 8 people for one athlete, roughly 7 to 8 people for one athlete on like the whole scale, right? So the biomechanist up to the strength coach to the personal coach. Is that common for each one of these athletes in your purview?
Yeah. So, we talk about performance bias privilege. So out of the 32, we have 6 different categories, so my top ones are category 1. So these are the guys that are Olympic medalists or world championship medalists. And they obviously have a bigger team around them than the guys that are category 6 at the start of the pathway, but still we have pretty strong team, all around all of our athletes. Strength and conditioning and sports medicine is the basis of what we provide. When we get to the top end, then it's more about biomechanics and exercise physiology, because I have less of that resource. So it's kind of, it's needs analysis dependent. So if I think it can make a performance impact, then I'll involve the exercise physiologist to monitor the training loads of the 400-meter runners. There's no point in getting an exercise physiologist involved in the sprinters, because they're not kind of working in those energy systems. So it's my job to try to analyze where we can get performance gains, how I can use my team to try to help the coach athlete pairs get the best out of what they're trying to do.
And how many did you say there 4 or 7 of these academies in Australia?
Oh, there's one in each state. Yeah, so each state has its own sports institute, and then there's the Australian Institute of Sport, which sits on top of that. That's the National Sports Institute, which is, in the old days, when Australia first started their sports institute system, it was a centralized program, whereas everyone from Australia had to go to Canberra. Then they kind of worked out that relocating everybody to one place, it wasn't a good idea. So then they went to a decentralized program, and they started sports institutes in the 90s in each of the states. Now, each state kind of, the Sports Institute, it varies in funding from the state governments. In Queensland, where I work, we have a very well-funded program. Our Sports Institute gets about $30 million per year from the state government, whereas in the other states, maybe it's not so strong. So the services that we give in Queensland, we give a very high level of service provision compared to some of the other states.
So how do you work at all with the other states' sports academies? And then on top of that, because I think for sure you have to be working with that, the Athletics Australia, the overall cap. How does that work as far as amongst yourselves and then upwards to the full team, Team Australia?
Yeah, so at the moment, we're just going for a review process. So twice a year, we do our funding reviews. So after the benchmark event with the BME, we then assess our coach athlete. Are they still on medal pathway? Are they 2 years from Olympic medal? Are they 4 years from Olympic medal? Are they 6 years from Olympic medal? Have we decided now that they no longer have the potential to win Olympic medal? Then they come off funding. So we do that review twice a year. So after Olympics, which is now, so we're going through that review process right now, will be finalized next month. And then we do it after the Australian domestic season. So that'll be in April after the Australian Championships. So it's constantly, everyone's being accounted. We're checking on people's progress. The younger guys not pushing so much. The guys that are in their mid-20s, then we're really watching, have they plateaued? Are they still increasing? Have they still got what it takes? You know, so that's the kind of how we review it. But yeah, your question was working with Athletics Australia, because Athletics Australia obviously is the national governing body. They control what we call the direct athlete support. So our top athletes, they receive a monthly stipend, basically a salary from the federation. So the Athletics Australia decide who is on that level of funding and what kind of monthly stipend they receive. And then you have to be what we call categorized by the national governing body to then receive support services in your local sports institute. So everyone that I service, the 32 I service, are all categorized or recognized under the Athletics Australia National Plan, which is approved by the Australian Institute of Sport and the Australian Sports Commission. So it's very much a coordinated program between the national level and the state and regional levels. But between the state institutes, really we kind of work independently. Like I have a lot of colleagues in different state institutes, which I'm talking to, of course, but sometimes we get athletes relocate from one state institute to another to work with a different coach or in a different area. Then we get transfer of athletes. But yeah, I mean, right now we've got a lot of people relocating to Brisbane because we have less problems with COVID up here. The weather is better for training all year round. There's a big surge on now with up and coming events, with which things are happening. You know, with the announcement of 2032 Olympics, our state institute is probably, you know, one of the best funded ones. We've just opened a new $10 million gym. We've just redoing our sports science area, you know, so really upgrading our infrastructure, you know, so it's seen as a place to be, you know. And you know, another thing we're kind of working on right now is we're developing a high performance throw center, which will be quite unique for Australia, where you can throw from indoors to outdoors. So we're basically building a shed type environment where we're going to have two cages plus 2 javelin runways. We'll have all of the overhead side cameras, all of the biomechanics gear in there. We'll avoid lost training days due to rain and excessive heat. So we're trying to create the ultimate environment for our throwers.
Yeah, I've seen that with like, I think Johannes Vetter showed some videos of this kind of inside to outside component. In fact, Jerry Clayton, when he was at University of Michigan, built his indoor facility very similar. He's got the garage bay doors to where he can go from in to out, so he doesn't have to worry too much about winter weather.
Yeah. I mean, coming from Finland, where we trained indoors almost all of the time, and then coming to Brisbane, I was thinking, okay, Brisbane's called the Sunshine State. I thought, well, it's going to be fantastic. My athletes will be able to train, you know, 52 weeks a year, won't be any problems. But we are, you know, very close to the Tropic of Capricorn here. We're very tropical. We get quite a lot of rain, you know, so that affects obviously training days in the summer. And also the heat, it's so hot, you can't spend a lot of time in the direct sun, you know. So I was quite surprised, you know, I've only been here now 7 or 8 months, that training was affected due to the weather, and we needed to create a more stable environment for our athletes. You know, so we got some good throwers here. Kelsey Lee Barber, who was the Olympic bronze medalist in javelin, world champion in Doha. She's relocating from Canberra up here to Brisbane now. We have Matt Denny, who was 4th in the discus. You know, we've got Nash Lois, who was a world junior champion in javelin, you know. So we have a really good cohort of throwers here. So we're looking to try and build that as one of our stronger events in this state.
You mentioned those 3 amazing athletes that were a lot of fun to watch at the Tokyo Olympics. I think Australia got maybe 3rd in the decathlon as well. What's the overall mood for Team Australia as they are coming off of Tokyo, world champs next year, Olympics in 3 years? That sounds so weird to say, by the way. And knowing that, you know, Olympics are going to be in Australia in 32?
Yep, 32. Yeah, 32. So 11 years away.
Yeah. What's the overall mood going into this next season?
I mean, Tokyo was a great success for us. You know how we kind of measure performance on points. So if you're 8th place in the Olympics, you get 1 point. If you're 1st, you get 8 points. So on the points tally, this was our 3rd best ever Olympics, behind Sydney, which was a home Olympics, and in Moscow 1980, which was, you know, obviously a boycott affected Olympics. So I think we got 56 points, you know, overall. So we got 3 medals. So Nicola McDermott got bronze in the high jump, And then, with silver in the high jump. We had Ash got bronze in the decathlon, and then Kelsey got bronze in the javelin. So 3 medals was pretty strong for us. But the overall points is really promising because we had a lot of people in that 4 to 8 range. So it's about how can we convert those guys that were 4th to 8 into medalists in Paris. So that's kind of the big mission for us.
Yeah, that's exciting, right? You do kind of throw out 80s, right? Because of the boycotts and stuff like that. And then to be basically second behind when you host it. I mean, you get the, the national boost, if you will, from being at home and having home fans and being able to stay in state instead of having to worry about time zones and stuff. That's amazing. What a great Olympics. That's awesome.
Yeah. And the crazy thing was we only had one relay team in Tokyo because we had the women's 4x4, but because our teams needed to qualify to go to the World Relay Championships in Poland, because here, you guys probably don't know, but we live kind of in a COVID prison. Right now, you can't leave Australia without the Australian government's permission. And if you do get out, if you want to return, they only let in 4,000 people a week. And those people all have to spend 2 weeks in a hotel quarantine, locked in a government hotel. You get met at the airport by the police. They take you on a bus to the hotel airport. They put you in a room. You're not allowed out of that room for 2 weeks. If you go out of that room, you get $20,000 fine. They bring all your food to your room. They test you 3 times while you're there for COVID. And then you're allowed out in the general population. So Australia decided not to send a team to World Relay Championships. So that meant that our men's 4x1, our women's 4x1, men's 4x4, our mixed relay teams didn't end up qualifying. So for instance, our women's 4x1 team, they ran their 3rd fastest time ever this year, but didn't get in because the way the rules work, it was top 8 from Doha got in straight away, and then the top 8 from World Relay Champions got in. So Ecuador got in, Denmark got in because they qualified through that system, even though our guys were faster on time. So, add a couple more relay teams to that, they would have finished top 8. Then we would have got, even a few more points. So it was really amazing.
That is amazing. That's awesome. Well, it's interesting to hear about your role for Team Australia today, because Australia plays a huge part in your overall development. Super excited to jump into that. Let's kind of get in our Wayback Machine and go back. Your career kind of started in Australia as well. We're going to learn about a whole bunch of other places. This guy, world traveler here. Let me tell you, go back. What did you kind of start out with for Australia way back in the day?
Yeah. So I grew up in Perth on the other side of Australia. So I'm in Brisbane now. So Perth's 5,000 kilometers away. So it's funny, everyone kind of says, "Oh, it's nice to be home," but I'm still 5,000 kilometers from home. And
you want to know how bad? So here's how dumb, metrically and imperial I am. You said 5,000 kilometers, and I was like, "Oh my, 3.1 miles." You said 5,000 kilometers away, not not a 5K, a 5,000K. Okay, that's much better. I was like, you're right. They're right at home.
So about 3,000 miles away. Yeah. So it's like LA and New York. We're a long way away. But I started doing athletics there in high school, and I was a pretty average athlete. Enjoyed a bit of high jump, run a bit of 1,500 stuff like that. And then back then in Perth, there was nobody doing pole vault. And me and a couple of my mates, we found some poles in the equipment shed, and we kind of taught ourselves how to jump. And I jumped 3 meters 80 in my first year, so a bit below 13 feet. In the second year, I jumped 4 meters, then 420, then 445. So I got the 14'6". So I was a pretty average pole vaulter, but there was nobody jumping in Perth back then. And Perth's the most isolated city in the world. It's 35 hours drive to the nearest city, so there was no real kind of influence for me. And then I kind of met this 13-year-old guy who was running 400s, and he ran 60 seconds in the 400. And I said to him, "You want to come and try pole vault?" I was in my early 20s then. He said, "Yeah, sure." And that guy's name was James Miller. And I coached James Miller from first day picking up a pole to 96 Olympics. He jumped 575, broke all the Australian records, on the way through. And then after that, I met this.
Well, hold on. We can't just go right past him on that. Wait a minute. What did you see, or is this just blind luck that you were pole vaulting, so you're like, "Hey, you're athletic, why don't you try pole vaulting?" Or was there something that you even back then could talent identify and see, like, "Oh yeah, you're wasting your time with a 400, you are a pole vaulter"?
Well, he was kind of a tall kid. I mean, he ended up being like 6'1.5". So he was a good kind of lanky kid at 13, moved quite well. But, back then there was no one pole vaulting. So anybody who was interested to try pole vault, I was like, "Come along." Like I had a squad of maybe, 20 20 pole vaulters then, and a lot of them went on to be internationals. But yeah, so it was kind of, I've always kind of coached. I got into coaching because I like helping people, and I like introducing people to the event, and that was, it was kind of, just come and try and let's see what we can do, and that's kind of how it went. But yeah, so Jimmy was my first generation of athlete, and I kind of made a lot of mistakes with him. And if I'd coached him again, I would have done things different. But he still had a pretty good career. We went to World Juniors, World Champs. But the second generation was a guy called Paul Burgess, and he was a 14-year-old gymnast in Perth. And the gymnastics team decided that he was going to be too tall to be a gymnast, offered him the chance to do another sports, and they come and knocked on my door then and said, look, we got this young kid. He's I think he was like 5 foot tall at the time, and said he'd like to try pole vault. So I started coaching Paul when he was 14, and he won the World Juniors when he was 17, jumped 18'4" at so 560 when he was 17, 18. So he was World Junior champion. Then he obviously went on to jump 6 meters, went to multiple Olympics. So that was kind of my second generation of guys.
What you said, they came and knocked on your door. What is your role at this point?
Yeah, so I started working for the West Australian Institute of Sport. So it's the equivalent of the Queensland Australian Institute of Sport in Perth. So I was lucky. I started then at the age of 24. I got a coaching scholarship there. So the head coach kind of said to the director, he said, look, this guy, Steve Rippon, he's pretty special. There's not many pole vault coaches around. We should invest some money in this guy. So I was lucky that he kind of identified me as someone as having coaching potential. So I did an apprenticeship then with the West Australian Institute of Sport as a coach, and it was really kind of a hands-on learning kind of environment. And that's what I learned about being part of a multidisciplinary team, because I was kind of immersed in the sports science, sports medicine world, learned how to work in conjunction with other professionals and use the team as best you can to try and get the best result for your athletes. So that was kind of my grounding and how I learned to work in this kind of cooperative way.
So you're going through this internship program, well on your way to becoming a coach. Is this what you foresaw as your path as a professional? Did you grow up thinking you're going to be an accountant, a doctor, or was it, I was going to be a coach?
Yeah, no, it's kind of weird, like in my teen years, I just kind of enjoyed all sports. I was, never really a good sportsman. I tried really hard at everything, but I just kind of found coaching was natural for me, and I found a way of understanding motor patterns, breaking motor patterns, teaching people motor skills. I think that's just something that a talent that I've kind of got. It's something, coaching is we always talk about coaching as an art, not a science, but it's an art supported by science. And I think that I'm very much in that model is, I've kind of used science to support me in teaching, people how to move correctly and to learn motor skills. But so it's just something that I've just developed a passion for in my 20s and really, enjoyed working with people, so every day I go to work, it's not difficult to do, and I still enjoy, helping young people be as good as they can,
And who in this early part of your career are you leaning on? Who's pouring into, who's a mentor, if you will, at this point in the coaching side of your life this early?
Yeah, so in 1990, the West Australian Institute of Sport recruited a head coach from the UK, from Wales. It was a guy called Tudor Bitter. And Tudor had worked in Oman, coached Mohammed Al Malki, who was finalist in Olympics in 400, and then came to Perth. And then Tudor was in his early 30s then, but a really good coach, worked in high jump, long jump, triple jump, 400-meter running, 400 hurdles. He was really good across the board. And he was kind of my mentor in regards to basically his work ethic, the way he coordinated as the head coach, the whole team, the way he kind of coached his athletes. He kind of taught me a lot, in how to work as a professional coach, and very much, most of my learning has been self-directed. He never taught me how to coach pole vaulting, but he taught me how to get out there, how to network, how to become a fielder for good and bad, but become a sponge, and then kind of when I was first started coaching, I looked around Australia, tried to work out best practice in Australia. Then I kind of saw that, you know, the best kind of pole vaulters in the world were coming from the Soviets. So then I tried to make connections with the Soviet coaches. And then from there, you know, as I started to travel to more and more international competitions, I spent all my time sitting at the warm-up track, sitting at the training track, watching, you know, different people prepare for competition, you know, and that's kind of how I learn as a coach, you know. So it's very different nowadays. I mean, there's so much available now on, you know, podcasts like you're doing now, Mike, and then YouTube. And it's I think now you've got to be much more careful filtering between good and bad practice, because there's so much stuff that young coaches can absorb. But you kind of, for me, I've got sort of, you know, a small group of mentors who have very similar kind of philosophies, and they've always been my go-to kind of people. And I've kind of, my coaching journey has been like going down the yellow brick road. I kind of don't go left or right. I kind of, you know, if I bring something new in, it's got to fit to my current ethos and what I feel comfortable with, you know. So I'm not changing my philosophy every 5 minutes.
Yeah, I love how you said, you know, something that Tudor taught you about, you know, being a sponge, but that doesn't mean just taking everything in. It means a sponge is a filter. So everything that comes in, the good stuff stays, and you've got to remove the bad stuff that comes in. So I just love that visual of being a sponge, but then taking the next step with it, that a sponge is a filter, which means some good things go through and some bad things don't. You don't let those go through at all.
I mean, I think the amazing thing about our sport, and I've become very much more in my age, more understanding of different practices. You know, let's talk about sprinting, for instance. You know, 100 meters. Everybody runs 100 meters, but you can approach training by going short to long or long to short. You know, so some people work on being faster in 100 by running 40s and 60s and then running 100. Some people run 150s, 200s, 300s, you know, but both ways get exceptional results, you know. So, you know, I've never been critical of anybody following a methodology that gets them results. You know, as long as you're following the principles of science and good practice, you know, I know there's certain ways of training which have higher injury risk and certain ways of training which have lower injury risk. So I've always erred on the side of caution. You know, we talk about going slow to go fast. You know, I kind of have that methodology about the way that I train, always a little bit sub-maximal, never kind of pushing the boundaries of high intensity, high volume. So it's just trying to find that balance. And, you know, but I'm very understanding there's many different ways of doing it. You know, when you look at pole vault, the French technique is very different from the Russian technique, you know, but I'd never be critical of the French because they've had amazing results over the years, you know, and they have a different philosophy. And I'm quite comfortable with that. I don't feel like I have to convert everybody to my way of thinking.
Yeah, I think I'm an example of going slow to go fast. That proves that that's not correct, Steve. I've been going slow my whole life, and I'm still not. I can't even drive a car fast. That's how slow I am. Now, you know, in my coaching career, I was coaching for 10 years, and I went to 5 different institutions. And, you know, over here, I don't want to say it's common, but it's quite common that, you know, we go from this university to this college, to this college, to this university, et cetera. How does that work for you in regards to, so after Australia, you go somewhere else? Take us where we go after this first stint at Australia.
Yeah, I mean, because it's a bit like in college in the States, you've kind of got to move, you know, from being a GA to being an assistant coach at a small school, to an assistant coach at a bigger school, to being a head coach at a small school. You kind of got to keep stepping around.
That's the game plan right there. Yeah.
Work your way up the ladder. And, you know, I get that, but that kind of doesn't exist in Australia because, you know, we have, you know, each state sports institute, there's only one national governing body, you know, and kind of, you know, I grew up in Perth, like I said before, the most isolated city in the world. You know, there's only 2 million people in Perth. There's nobody for miles around. And I got the feeling as a young athlete who became a young coach who was, you know, quite successful as a young coach, that I never really got the recognition for what I was developing there. And I kind of figured that, you know, I needed to go away for 3 or 4 years, get some international experience, then come back to Australia as a more worldly kind of person, and then further my career. Little did I know when I left Australia in 1998 that I'd be away for 22 years, and that I'd finally return, but after spending 22 years overseas, you know. So my first stepping stone out of Australia was to go to the US, and I got a job at Columbia University as the head coach for the field events there. And I was always, as an Australian, interested in the NCAA structure and the way your collegiate system works, and so that was a really great opportunity that came up for me. So I was there for 12 months, and it gave me a great insight into how to combine academic, making an athlete into a good academically, as well as developing a sporting career. And, I've always seen that as being very important. I don't want to just develop athletes that are only good athletes. I want to make sure they've got a career after their athletics, and working in the NCAA taught me that you can combine both of those skills.
What was a major, in thinking about what you do after Columbia that we'll get to, but what was a major shock coming from, for us, an international style of coaching, and not the style of coaching, but the style of setup, right? The institutes and the overall Team Australia, going to a collegiate system. What was like a major, like you couldn't believe we did this, or you couldn't believe that we, and I say we as NCAA, didn't do this? What was like a major shock to you?
Yeah, so when I was in Perth, I was coaching decathlon, men's and women's pole vault. So I had, a pretty small cohort and a sharp focus on trying to produce Olympic medals. I had two athletes in the 96 Olympics, and then I had two athletes in the 96 World Juniors, both one in pole vault, one in decathlon in Olympics and World Juniors. So, four very successful international level athletes. And then I went to Columbia. I was looking after high jump, long jump, triple jump, pole vault, shot put, discus, javelin, hammer throw, men and women, so all of a sudden I'm like, wow. And, I'm used to coaching, 9 times a week with my guys, morning and evening sessions, trying to, get the pole vaults, do gymnastics in the morning and weight training in the afternoon. So I tried to coach like that at Columbia across all the events. And I was doing that and trying to recruit in the evening. And, I was single at the time, working, 60 to 90 hours a week, just going crazy. So don't ask me what New York was like, because I didn't see it. All I saw was the office, and I worked so hard that year, and I was really just trying to establish myself within the collegiate system. Recruiting was a new thing for me. I managed to recruit Michelle Ciccardo, who was the #1 high school pole vaulter in the US at the time. So I bought in, which is unusual for Columbia. It's an Ivy League academic-based school that doesn't give scholarships. So I managed to recruit her. I recruited a very good high jumper as well. So I had quite a good recruiting class, so it was, I was kind of trying to build then for the future. So, but that was kind of a big shock for me, the recruiting aspect of it, and having to get on the phone and sell myself to athletes, where I was used to in Australia, where athletes would relocate across Australia and even internationally to come and train with me. And here I am on the phone every night trying to sell myself to some kid in Texas that, hey, I can make you a better pole vaulter. That was tough. Yeah.
And what is the, how do I want to ask this? How is the NCAA system perceived internationally? Like, do other countries and federations look at how we model high school through college through the next level post-collegiate as like an aspiration or a hindrance?
Yeah, no. So for me, NCAA's it's a great place for athletes to go to develop and to get part of a really good team environment and a really good competition environment. But the athlete needs to be very careful which college they go to, and make sure that the coach at that college has the expertise to develop their event specific skills. So and the problem is, like we talked before about, you might go to a college and all of a sudden work with a coach, and then that coach moves to a different college. Then you're there for 4 years without a pole vault coach or a high jump coach, somebody who's more of a generalist than a specific coach. But I always, so when I'm advising athletes internationally about going to US college, I always say, if you're not going to make the next Olympics, so in the next Olympic cycle, you're not going to, say you're 19, you're not going to go in the next Olympics. I think US college is a great place for you to go and learn and to develop. If you've got a shot at making the next Olympics, it's maybe better to stay at home with a sharper focus, where you can make sure no mistakes are going to happen. And because the US college system doesn't really fit into the international system, because you have indoors January, February, your NCAA indoors are in March, then you go straight into spring break, spring training camp. Then you start competing already April, May. NCAA indoors are in June. So you've just done like a 6-month long season. The international season then is going July, August. So if somebody's going to go to a world champs or an Olympics in that year, they're pretty tired by the time they get to the major championships. So that's pretty tough. But if you're a young developing athlete, 19 to 22, 23, that team environment, that team experience, I think is amazing. You know, if you're a middle distance runner in Australia, trains in a small group, and then all of a sudden you go to a school which has a great middle distance program, all of a sudden you're running with a pack of 10, 15 guys at your level. You know, I think that's a great environment to get to develop, you know. So I think there's a lot of pluses to the US collegiate system for international athletes in becoming more rounded, and that greater competition opportunity. For the high performance guys, it has to be really carefully sought after, that it has to be exactly the right coach. And there's some great coaches in US college system, but it has to be, you know, really careful about that environment.
So we spent 12 months at Columbia. I'm sure that had to be at least a few of those months, some of the coldest months you've had up to this point in your life. Where do we go after Columbia?
Yeah, I mean, I never saw snow till I was 32. So, you know, that was yeah, and you know, so from Columbia, so the British athletes had their worst ever Olympics in '96. They didn't win any medals, and then after that, UK Sport decided they were going to start to fund their national program. So there was a lot of money coming into British sport, the lottery funding system that we've had in Australia now for a number of years longer than the Brits. So they were starting to set up high performance training centers across Britain. So I applied for a job to be the high performance manager at one of those Olympic training centers, which is based at Loughborough University, which is the biggest sports university in Great Britain. Massive tradition. That's where Sebastian Coe went to university, the president of World Athletics, Steve Backley, who was, you know, many times Olympic medalist in javelin, Paula Radcliffe, former world record holder in marathon. They're all alumni from Loughborough. So it's a huge sports school, but still quite different from a US college school. So I applied for that job, not expecting to get it. I was a 32-year-old guy, pretty young. I was going up against a bunch of very experienced British coaches that were in their, you know, late 40s, 50s, who'd coached multiple medalists. And the British Federation decided to take a punt on me, you know, and bring me in as, you know, a young, energetic guy who'd worked in the Australian system, understood the multidisciplinary approach, you know, worked in the US. You know, I was full of energy and bubble, went in there in the interview, really went hard, and they decided to recruit me. So I was lucky. Back then, there was only sort of 6 people in the British high performance staff, and now there's over 60. And I basically got the chance to transform. One of the questions they asked me at the interview was, what do you think of Loughborough University's facilities? And I said, well, to be honest with you, it's at about the same level as a US high school. But they had lots of plans then to improve it. And I caveated that by saying, if you make the improvements you're planning on doing, then you're going to end up with a great world-class facility. So I thought that comment can kind of either lose or win the job for me. But luckily they took a punt on me, and yeah, I was able to get in there and really set the place up.
And this was part of the plan, right? You mentioned leaving Australia to come to Columbia. It was part of, you didn't know it was going to take 22 years, but it was a plan of becoming a world, you know, seeing other aspects of athletics. So you've done Columbia, and here's part of the plan. Now we're going to UK as the high performance manager. Is that what it ended up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
High performance manager at Olympic Training Center at Loughborough University. Yeah. So, I mean, when I was working in Columbia, it was all about getting an Ivy League champion. And if you can get an Ivy League champion, it was about trying to get an NCAA champion. But, you know, my focus had always been about trying to win Olympic medals and trying to meet people as best they can, you know. And I struggle with the fact that I'd recruit someone to spend 4 years at college, and then I'd see them when they graduated, you know, whereas it's kind of, if I was investing that much time and energy into someone and getting them to a world-class level, I wanted to see the job go all the way through, you know. So when the British job came up, and it was, you know, a really exciting job to work in a big center with such huge athletic tradition. And, you know, Great Britain is one of the powerhouse of track and field, you know, winning, you know, traditionally 6 to 8 medals at Olympics and Worlds every year. I thought, yeah, this is a great opportunity to really take up, you know. So yeah, I went for it, and I was there 11 years. So it was a long gig in the end.
So how did it go in those 11 years? You know, I know some of the athletes that you got to work with there. How did it go developing them over a much longer time frame instead of just 4 short years?
Yeah, no. So it was great. I mean, when I first started there, we didn't have an indoor facility, so I was struggling, in Britain in inclement weather, trying to coach. So one of the first things I got was a big chunk of money to build an indoor facility. So it was really nice to build a facility where we could pole vault indoors. I set up indoor throwing cages, the same as I'd seen in Finland. So that was kind of pretty unique at the time. So yeah, I got to build a great facility, which was really exciting. And then I had two athletes in the 2000 Olympics. So actually, I had two athletes in the pole vault, men and women. Two athletes in the high jump, men and women again. So that was really exciting. I kind of hit the ground running. Already had 4 Olympians to work with. And then kind of from there, I started to recruit my own squad and bring in, younger kind of athletes and managed to get guys top 8 in the world at world champs and Olympics, over that period, so it was really good. And then, I was managing, again, performance management's always been a part of the role that I've done. And it's kind of to be only a track and field coach in a national governing body, you're always at risk. Because if you don't have athletes that are at Olympic and World Championship level, the federation starts to look, why are we spending money on this guy? So I've always tried to have 2 or 3 roles within my job: performance management, national team roles, like I was the under-23 team leader with Great Britain, and then personal coaching. So you move from different sections. When your personal coaching is going really well, then the federation backs off on the other aspects. When your personal coaching is going for a bit of a down cycle as you're regrouping, they kind of give you more of the other kind of work. So that's how I've managed to stay employed for the last 30 years, is by kind of juggling balls. Because as we know, with coaching, it goes in generations and in waves, and once an athlete retires or gets injured, you're always constantly searching for the next one.
You mentioned you started recruiting your own athletes, younger athletes, to come through the UK system. What does that look like? So when we hear recruiting, we think about what you were talking about in Columbia, right? So calling the kid in Texas saying, hey, I coach at Columbia, I'd love to talk to you, see if you're interested, blah, 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 blah. What's that look like on this side where you said you're recruiting athletes to come into the program?
It's a different world. It's really different, and I'm kind of finding this now I've come back to Brisbane. I keep talking to my staff and said, if we were working in pro sport, then we'd be able to tell the athletes much more. We want you to work with this coach. We want you to move to this place, but we have to try to work on goodwill all the time, and recruiting, when an athlete is working with a personal coach who's a volunteer coach and not part of a national structure, all you can try to do is rely on that athlete making the right decisions about their career, deciding when they've outgrown the daily training environment they're in, which is really, it's a dangerous thing, because you're relying on an 18-year-old to make a decision, which is, the best interest in their career, but all they know is that one coach. So I always use the analogy, when you go to primary school, you have a math teacher. You don't have the same math teacher then when you go to high school. You don't have the same math teacher then when you go to college. So it's natural you progress as you go through your education, that you change teachers. But in coaching, in the world of volunteer coaches, a lot of coaches believe they can take an athlete from being a junior athlete all the way to Olympic level. But it's a very different environment, and the time needed to spend with that athlete, traveling, working twice a day, training twice a day, most coaches who have full-time other jobs can't make that commitment, so you rely on a coach being savvy enough and caring enough about their athlete to be willing to hand them on, but it doesn't happen too often. So we have a system where we kind of talk with coach athlete pairs and try to make sure that they understand what the limitations are within their daily training environment. We have a lot of national team camps. We try to expose coach athlete pairs to best practice to see how it should look. And then we try to, coerce very carefully people to make changes. Yeah. But you can't go in there with a hammer and go, bang, change, that's it. But, I mean, that's probably the way they do it in the Soviet Union. That's probably the way they do it in North Korea, but unfortunately, in a democracy, we can't do that.
I
Yeah.
was going to say you can. It doesn't always work out, but yeah, you
No.
can, exactly. So
Yeah.
over here, we talk a lot with guests on the show about their coaching education. We touched on it a little bit earlier, right? Over here, we have USATF has a coaching education level 1, level 2, level 3. We have an organization for the Track and Field Cross Country Coaches Association. They've got coaches education. We now have a lot of options from Altus, private coaches that are doing Zoom calls. What does the coaching education world look like in the UK? And what is your involvement, if anything, at all, whether teaching or student in your coaching education development?
Yeah. So like I said, like I've run in my career a lot of national team programs, and like, let's talk about pole vault. It's an easy one to talk about. So, I'd get probably the best 10 male and female juniors to come for a camp with their coaches, and then try to educate their coaches and the athletes about best practice and how to perform technical drills, how to do fault correction. And then when they go home to their own environment, you hope they keep continuing those drills, and that's the way it kind of builds. So I've run a lot of kind of domestic camps within the country I'm working on, run a lot of training camps, warm weather training camps. So we go a lot of times to Portugal, Greece, Italy for training camps. We take coaches and athletes away for 2 or 3 weeks for a warm weather training camp every year, trying to work very closely with them in that kind of way. So that's kind of the informal kind of coaching that I've done, and I think it's the best way to kind of work. We have all these kind of structures with level 1, level 2, level 3, and they kind of provide the basics about the generics of coaching. I've done quite a few lectures at the European Pole Vault Conference, which is a great conference which happens every 2 years. I get your American listeners to, it's going to be a podcast or going to be web this year because of COVID. So you should get all your listeners to sign up. That's a high jump and pole vault symposium. So I've lectured at that quite a lot. So that's kind of where we kind of bring coaches together to try to upskill them and expose them to best practice. So that's kind of the way it kind of works, I think, is generically we try to develop coaches through the national governing body structure. And then as we get more event specific, then it's more about a one-on-one kind of clinic type of environment. But yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in that. I'm gonna call it hands-on type of coaching education that you're describing there. Yeah, I think of Vince Anderson talked about sitting down with Tom Tellez. He didn't talk about going and Vince has taught lots of coaching education programs and such, but he talked about going to practice and watching Tom do his craft. I remember working with Brent McFarland, Canadians Olympic coach, back when I coached. He brought his team down to San Diego and invited me out, and to see him and his coaches, how they interacted with athletes, what they were prescribing, how they were correcting things, there was a lot of value in like that. I hate to call it the real world application, but seeing it in real time, not on a PowerPoint screen, basically, a report of how things went. We got to see it in the real time. So when you're a coach like this, these high performance management type of positions, is the performance criteria, like your bosses, is the full criteria based on Olympic placing, or is it a hodgepodge of the Commonwealth Games plus the World Champs, national championships? Is it a hodgepodge, or how do they figure out if you're doing a good job or not? How do they tell you you're doing a good job or not?
Yeah, so our KPIs are all about Olympic medals, Olympic and World Championship medals. So we talk about BME, which is benchmark events. So the benchmark events are Olympics and World Champs. It's not World Indoors, it's not Commonwealth Games, so those kind of things are kind of seen as stepping stones. But so everything it's all about pathway, so it's a pathway. Is somebody 6 years away, 4 years away, 2 years away from the possibility of winning an Olympic medal? And we've got a lot of data on, we've been tracking for a number of years Olympic medalists and what they were doing in the years before. So we employ a data analyst, somebody just crunches numbers all day long. And I can go to him and say, look, I've got a pole vaulter who's 14-year-old who's jumped, who's 20 years old, who's jumping 5 meters 40, and then he'll plug that into his program, look at the algorithms, and then see how they're tracking. Are they on the performance funnel? Are they likely to medal? What the previous medalists have looked like? You know, we know there's exceptions to the rules, but generically there's a pretty strong database on what people look like and how they track, you know. So that's a lot of what we look at. And then we look at then also their daily training environment. Have they been training full time since they were 10, or have they come into the sport late? What's the scope for improving this person? Are they the finished item already? You know, so those are kind of process orientated things that we'll look at when we're assessing somebody's ability. Yeah, but all this information is on Athletic Australia's website. So if you go to Athletic Australia's website, then look at the performance place, then you can look at the NAS policy, and that's all detailed. You can read that if anybody's interested. They can look at that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned when you first got to the UK, you right off the bat, you had 2 vaulters and 2 multi-athletes right into the Olympics and the World Juniors. How did the last half of your time there in UK, what kind of athletes were you able to develop during that 11-year span?
Yeah, so I mean, probably the second half of my career in Britain was working with Steve Lewis and Kate Dennison. So they both Kate broke the British record 12 times. Steve broke the British record a couple of times. They both finished top 8 at Worlds, so they were kind of the end product of what I was kind of able to do with British athletics, but. Yeah, so no, it was good. And then it's interesting now that a lot of the athletes I worked with when I first started it and went into coaching. So guys like Scott Simpson and Alan Richardson were my first kind of generation when I was in British athletics that were now then becoming coaches. So I'm getting to that stage in my career now where a lot of my former athletes now are coaching around the world, which is quite nice to see. And it's quite nice to see that the way that you coached them and the methodology that you kind of installed in them, that they're carrying on and in some cases taking to the next level or a tweaking in some kind of way. So I think it's a really good kind of compliment when you see your former athletes then coaching and working along similar kind of lines that you were working along.
You know, coaching is about making a positive impact on people's lives, right? All the way up to gold medals to academic degrees. So when you get to a certain age and stage, you get to look back and, say, hey, good job, right? You get to see some athletes that went into coaching and they're having success. And I'm sure you get coaches that went to become doctors and moms and dads, and they're doing a great job. That's a great example of the positive impact you make as a coach. That's awesome.
Yeah. And, and as a coach, I always see my role as a coach is to teach my athletes as much as I know about training and about the event. I don't kind of hold information back. I don't breed dependency. I want to make an independent, self-thinking athlete. So we start very much when we start out, it's very much me dictating what I want them to do, how it's going to look. And then as the coaching athlete relationship develops, it becomes much more a relationship of collaboration and trying to find, it's about solving that individual puzzle with each of the athletes you work with. When you get to the really top end and you're fighting for those 1%ers, every athlete's different in the way that they tick and how you can condition. Some of the athletes can do more speed work, some can do more plyometrics, some need to back off because of certain problems they got with their biomechanics and their anatomy. And it's really about problem solving, which is quite the exciting part of working with these top end athletes.
So where do we go? We spent 11 years at UK. Where are we going, world traveler? Where are we going now?
So from there, then I was head coach with England at the Commonwealth Games, and when I came back from the Commonwealth Games, then I started work with Scottish athletics. So I moved to the north of the border. So I went up to Glasgow, and I was working up there, and I started to work actually with a really exciting young pole vaulter there, a guy called Jack Fors, and he ended up getting a scholarship at the University of Washington and winning NCAA indoors, working with Pat Licari. So he's a great example of an athlete I've moved to the US system. So he was probably one of the most talented guys I've ever worked with. 6'6", super fast, super strong, amazing athlete.
I was gonna say, I remember him. First of all, you knew he was from Scotland. He was Scottish, absolutely.
Yeah.
But yeah, super tall, athletic. I remember him, watching him and the great Pat Licari working with him. He did awesome over here.
Yeah. So it was kind of, I went up to Glasgow and then kind of met this kid, and the average kids in Glasgow are pretty small and mild and weak, and then this kid, he's a leftover of Viking invasion.
Right.
He's definitely got Norwegian blood in him when some kind of Viking trips come down and he's been left behind. But yeah, he was an absolute beast. But yeah, so I was in Scotland for a year, and that was kind of. I went up there as the head of field events and facilities. So they had a big project where they were trying to develop their facilities. So they recruited me off the back of the facilities work I'd done with British Athletics at Loughborough.
Right.
So that was quite exciting. I've always enjoyed that kind of aspect of the work, looking at developing facilities. And hammer throwing had a great tradition in Scotland. So I was really trying to support the hammer throwing coaches and develop hammer throwing, because of Highland Games, it's a kind of a big Scottish tradition, and it's in their blood. They're out there in their kilt throwing the hammer and tossing the caber and everything. So I tried to find events that Scotland could be very successful. And Scottish athletics right now is doing phenomenally well with a lot of medalists from the British team coming out of Scotland now. So that was kind of an exciting year. I was up there for a year. The family stayed in England, and I'd commute every week driving backwards and forwards. And we kind of said to the wife, look, I'll do this for a year, and then we can decide if we want to relocate, because we kind of had 4 kids and we didn't want to keep moving the kids around if we weren't kind of sure where we were going to go. So yeah, we did that for a year, and then kind of got to the position of reassessing what we wanted to do.
Yeah, you wanted to stay married, right? So
Yeah, big incentive.
yeah, it's a partnership, right? It's not just follow me wherever I go, the world traveler. So
Yeah.
I like that you're very cognizant of that. Did you do anything? You talk about facilities. Obviously, I have a passion for track and field athletics facilities. Did you do anything unique, or that kind of maybe your signature piece or something that you did at Scott for the Scottish Federation or even the UK? Was there anything kind of interesting that maybe we don't see over here in the States?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the first thing I did with Scottish Athletics, with their stadium, they had a small indoor hall. I got gymnastics equipment in there, so the guys could do pole vault and gymnastics at the same time. I always like, that when we do a pole vault jump or a drill, we can then go back and replicate that on the gymnastics gear. So I put in high bar rings, parallel bars at the back of the pole vault area, which was a small thing I could do quite quickly. And then I worked on I came in the end of a really big project. They were building an indoor 200-meter stadium, which had crowd capacity for over 5,000 people, which also had an indoor cycling velodrome alongside it. So that was part of the Commonwealth Games they had in 2006. But since then, they've had European indoor championships for athletics there. And I reckon they'll have a world indoors there pretty soon. So it's a really nice 200-meter banked runway track. And I got in there at the later stages of that facility build, but I was able to influence a couple of things. They had no indoor throwing cages in there, for instance. So I managed to move the seating configuration a bit, the way the bleachers came back, so we could throw hammer indoors in there. I managed to influence a couple of the things around the training equipment. But yeah, so that was kind of one of the big things I managed to do up there in Scotland. And then, because the big signature piece for me in Loughborough was the indoor hall that I designed when I first got there, which is where the Olympic Training Centre is now based with British Athletics. They have a centralised program. Everything now runs out of Loughborough.
Steve, I've always known you as a pole vault coach, and now I feel like that it doesn't do you justice. You're talking about making sure we're taking care of the Scottish hammer throwers, and making sure that the hammer things are protected, making sure all of our athletes have the right training capacities and tools and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I think the high performance manager side, that much better encapsulates how you think and how you act.
Yeah, we talk a lot about DTE here, which is a daily training environment.
You guys have more initials than I've ever heard. The DTE and the you've said about 1,000 of them so far.
Yeah, I must admit, when I came back here after 22 years, I was sitting in meetings and I had to keep putting my hand up and say, sorry, what's that acronym? What does that mean? So I felt like I didn't even speak Australian when I came back, so, but now I've got the hang of it, but yeah, I mean, so they've got so many acronyms, it's crazy. Yeah, but yeah, so Yeah, so the DTE, or the daily training environment, is what I look at and assess with all the coach-athlete pairs I
Yeah.
work at. Do they have massage? Do they have physio? Do they have a doctor? Is the sports medicine right? What have they got in the way of sports science? Do they have biomechanics, exercise physiology? Is a nutritionist needed? Is the access to facilities right? If it's a technical event, do they have all the equipment that they need? These are all the things that we know are very important when an athlete is trying to maximize their potential. We don't want to work in a compromised environment. I like to create what I call a no excuses environment. We want the athlete to be able to look in the mirror at the end of the day and say they did or they didn't make it, and it was all up to them. It wasn't, oh, I couldn't get to the track because the track was closed, or if it hadn't rained so much last year, I would have been able to throw the javelin more often, or because it was snowing, I couldn't throw the hammer outside. So they're all excuses. We try to get rid of those excuses. Yeah.
So you're in Scotland. You said you're driving back and forth to the family. You have kids. Where did the wife put her foot down and say, we're moving somewhere next?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I met my wife in '97 in the Helsinki Grand Prix. She's Finnish. She traveled the world with me. We first started dating. We were living in opposite hemispheres, and then I moved to New York. We're in the same hemisphere. Then I moved to England. We're in the same continent. And then after 4 years, she ended up moving to England. So
Closer and closer.
Gradually got closer and closer together. And then, I'd always had a very close relationship with Finnish athletics. Went there a lot for competitions, went there a lot for camps. I'd had Finnish athletes train with me in Australia, Finnish athletes train with me in Great Britain. And then after the 2011 Daegu World Championships, Finnish athletics didn't have a great meet. And the head coach was trying to reassess what he could do, because they had the 2012, obviously, Olympics in London, and then they had the European Championships in Helsinki. So he was trying to work out what he could do to invigorate his team. So he rang me up, and I was in Glasgow, called me on the phone, said, Steve, would you be interested in coming to Finland to work for us? So he recruited and headhunted me. And I said, well, let me speak to the wife. So I rang her up and I said, look, do you want to move to Scotland or do you want to move to Finland? And she goes, let's go to Finland.
That was an easy choice.
Yeah. So that was kind of, and the kids at the time were 7, 5, 5, and 2. So they were at that age. Academically, that was a good time to move them. Finnish education, is renowned as one of the best in the world. Okay. I got offered a job working in Lahti at the Lahti Sports Institute, which is a really big track and field sports institute. We have a 330-meter indoor track. Wow. Indoor facilities were fantastic. So it was, and I've always wanted to live and work in Finland. At one stage in my career. So I was there for almost 10 years, so a bit over 9 years. So it was a good move, interesting move. It very different from where I'd lived before. Lots of pine trees and lakes. Cold winters, which is a bit of a shock for Aussies, but it was a good time.
So you spent all of 9, 10 years there. The kids basically grew up there. Now, they're 17 and 15 and 15 and 12. How did you grow at this stage? You're literally around the world. You've checked that box off. You became the world traveler. You've coached many Olympians, medalists, PRs, all these different games, camps, clinics. You're teaching a lot. You're continue to learn. How do you grow at this stage while you're in Finland as a coach?
Sure. Yeah. So my focus became very much more narrow when I was in Finland because of obviously I don't speak Finnish. So my ability to use language was difficult.
Interesting.
So I moved away from performance management and more into just being a national event coach for pole vault. So I focused very much on running a domestic camp program where I would bring the pole vaulters to my sports institute. We would do lots of camp training environment sessions there. We did lots of warm weather training camps in Portugal and Greece. I tried to take the Finnish pole vaulters to competitions, indoors and outdoors in Europe. Finnish pole vaulters haven't been renowned for traveling that much. So I had a great network and connection through the German and French meets. And I used to take the guys to a lot more meets to try to develop them, because the Finns have a very good domestic program, but same guys competing against the same guys all the time. I felt like they needed to take out their comfort zone, compete against the world best a bit more often. So I did that a lot with with the best of the Finnish guys, you know. So that was in Finland, it was probably the best national event program I ran, you know, in regards to domestic training camps, international training camps, organizing domestic competitions, international competitions, and really trying to develop one event as best it could. That was probably the best work I've done in my career in developing one event. And, you know, I like to think that I've left a bit of a legacy there with my former athletes now coaching again in Finland. And two of the girls that I worked with while I was in Finland both competed in Tokyo, you know, so they've continued to keep working at a high level since I've left. So that's been quite nice.
You know, you've had a lot of successes, Steve. So for you to say that you felt like this was the best job you've done, what was that? Why, what changed? What was different there? Was it a focus, a more narrow focus on events? Or, I mean, that's a big statement to say this was the best job I had done.
Yeah, I mean, the best job I'd done in developing a single event or trying to coordinate and bring people together, you know, which is always the hard thing. You know, everyone's got their own kind of agenda, and we work in this volunteer-based world, and, you know, trying to bring coach-athlete pairs to your training environment, you need to offer something which is going to make a difference. You know, you need to be able to, they need to go home and feel like their training's improved, or they've learned something in that time. So, you know, I used to bring people in on a Sunday night. We'd train until Thursday afternoon. So they're there for 4 nights. You know, we'd do 3 pole vault sessions in that time. We'd go through their strength and conditioning, their gymnastic programs, and we do lots of those kind of mini camps, almost like one a month. You know, and then the better athletes I work with, they would come in on a Monday morning, stay until Friday afternoon, then go back to Helsinki or Tampere or wherever they kind of lived. So it was bringing people to the training center all the time, you know. So it was, it was good times. Yeah.
So after that success and really changing the directory of the program, you get a chance to come back. Now we're full circle. You're back in Australia, right?
Yeah. I mean, this position came up here in Brisbane, and I kind of, you know, about 3 years ago, I got the children Australian citizenships by descent. And then 2 years ago, I got them Australian passports, you know, which is quite a lengthy process, you know. And then the plan was always to bring the kids one at a time to Australia, you know, for a month while I was here on training camp. So, you know, 18 months ago, I brought my oldest daughter out for a month to Perth while we were on training camp. And, you know, and I just said to the wife, you know, the children are growing up now. It's probably a last chance as a family to make that move and to give them some kind of Australian experience before they all kind of graduate from high school, go to university and start to do their own thing. So this position came up here in Brisbane. I knew the QAS was a really well-funded, fantastic sports institute. I've always kind of wanted to live on the east coast of Australia because travel up and down this side is easy to Sydney and Melbourne compared to Perth. The climate here, it's warm all year round. You know, to give you some idea, I can only speak in Celsius, not in Fahrenheit, but, you know, it never gets colder than about 10 degrees Celsius here. You know, even in winter, it's still 20 degrees Celsius. You know, it's a bit hot and humid here in the summer, but you can kind of put up with that rather than being cold in the winter. You know, so the climate's great. You know, I wanted to give the children had a really kind of great winter experience living in Lahti, which is a big winter sports city. The boys all play ice hockey and do cross-country skiing and stuff like that. So bringing them here now, you know, want to get them more into sailing and surfing and those kind of things. So it was a great move for me as a family move and as a career move. And now, you know, I find myself in a position back in performance management, working with 32 athletes who are nationally team funded. You know, I've got Olympic medalists in my group. I've got guys that, you know, have potential for the next 10 years to really be on the world stage. You know, I've got the Sports Institute here has gone for a massive restructuring. They've now got double the funding from the government. They've gone from $15 million a year now to $30 million a year. So the support infrastructures here, you know, and then I've landed at the right time. You know, as I land, then they announced Brisbane being the 2032 host Olympic city. So there's going to be a lot of stuff happening here in the next, you know, 10 to 11 years. It's going to be a really exciting time.
You know, there was no way we were going to talk today, Steve, without bringing up the kids and their your ice hockey, your homemade ice hockey in the back. Do any of them do athletics, track and field, or other sports or
I've
activities?
kind of tried to steer my kids away from doing something that I do all every day. And I've never wanted to coach my kids, So my kids, they do sailing, they do ice hockey, they do judo, they do a variety of, cheerleading, dancing, all sorts of sports, anything but track and field. And it's kind of that way. I've seen too many of my fellow coaches coaching their own children. And I just think it's a really intense relationship when you're at the track trying to get maximum performance. And if things don't go well, then you're at home, then you kind of, there's no break from it, So, last night I was at the ice hockey rink with my son from 9 p.m. until 11 p.m. We got home last night at midnight. Poof, we just talked in the car, about general stuff and training. And, he's really into his conditioning training and other things. But, I'm not telling him how to play hockey because it's a foreign sport for me, as much as I love to watch it, I don't know the first place to start, but so I kind of enjoy that. They do sailing, which is another sport I know nothing about, but, it's really, I enjoy watching the coaching process that other coaches do to teach other sports. And, I have a lot more respect, now for sailing as an Olympic sport than I had 5 or 6 years ago before my kids started to sail. But, really they are phenomenal athletes, sailors, both technically and physically, because, the boats are all the same. It's all generic. And it's really very, very, very skill-based a sport.
Well, with the risk of insulting any sailors that we have on the podcast, we're just going to skip over sailing here. What you don't, how much you don't know, I know 100 times less about sailing. Not a water guy at all. Well, Steve, as we start to wrap up today, we're always working to how do we bring value to listeners? How do we help those who choose to listen to the podcast and listen to coaches and their journeys? You have a really unique viewpoint of track and field globally than maybe most of us as listeners, right? We're in our own bubble here in America. What advice would you give for a coach? And maybe you can split it up into high school and college. I don't know. Maybe it's general in that sense. But as a coach is working on their development to become a better coach, they want to be a better coach tomorrow, a better coach next year, a better coach a decade. They want to be able to look back and say, okay, I know more. I don't have to apologize to my athletes anymore. I don't screw them up like I'm doing. What kind of advice would you give coaches for that side of the profession?
Well, number one is make your track and field athletes into good athletes. So by that, I mean that they can do many things, that they can shoot a basketball, they can kick a football, they can do a forward roll, they can do a handstand, that they can move in multi-directional ways. I think part of the biggest problem we have in track and field is everything is linear down a straight line, and we have to remember the sagittal plane. We've got to be able to move left and right and get stability in our body, So, with my own children, like I've talked about, multi-sport background, many different sports, not early specialization. So for the high school coaches, I would say, and this probably happens a little bit more in the US and other places, that talented kids in high school, they're probably on the basketball team, the football team, the track team, so they're probably doing a few more sports, but really try to encourage that and find a way to work with the other coaches of your other high school sports to try to keep working in a collaborative way, because you can all benefit by trying to develop the general athletic skills of your students rather than early specialization.
Yeah, I think in certain aspects we do a good job here in the States. We could always do better. We're still battling, there's always the proverbial football versus track, because, for the male sprinters and jumpers and what have you. And then there's this culture of volleyball and 365 days a year because of club volleyball and things like that. So there's certainly a lot of programs where that, the coaching staff, not just the track coaching staff, but the volleyball, basketball, football, soccer, they understand, like, we have a shared pool here. Let's work together for the betterment of the athlete for the next level. We certainly have that. We certainly can continue to get to get better with that. Yeah, I think part of it, when we diverge where we have that, like, this is my athlete, they should only do football or they should only do volleyball or only do track, might stem a little bit because of our short-term time with them. Like you mentioned, we get, at best, we get 4 years with them, right? Sometimes an athlete doesn't come out for track in high school till their sophomore, junior, senior year, for crying out loud. College, they may come into it late as well. So we have such a finite time. It feels more possessive, like, oh, I need to get everything I can into this athlete because poof, they're gone.
It almost needs, the trouble is you've got different coaches with their own vested interest. The football coach is employed to make the football team as good as he can. The volleyball coach employed to make the volleyball team as good as they can. You almost need like the athletic director to coordinate, right? These are our most talented people. They're going to do volleyball in the fall. They're going to do track in the spring, and then kind of they're coordinating then how your best athletes are developed. That, like a director of sport, for instance, that would be, just chucking ideas out there, a kind of way to try to balance this talent rather than the vested interest of the individual coaches.
Yeah, we have athletic directors, but I would be willing to bet that 75% or more are the head football coach. So you're automatically like, heck, we have, where I grew up in small town Alabama, our football coaches were all the other sport coaches. So they were the tennis coach, the track coach, basketball, etc. I knew no different. I thought that's the way it was all across America. When I moved to Chicago and I called the local high school track coach to see if I could help out, I still remember I asked him, I was like, so what position do you coach in football? And, he looked at me like I had three heads. He thought I was like, what are you talking about, kid? Coach football, like I'm the track coach. What are you talking about? And I was like, oh, you don't coach football? He goes, no. He goes, no, I coach track. And I was like, well, what about the wrestling coach? Yeah, he just coaches wrestling, and basketball just coach. I was blown away. I was like, oh, that's like, this is more of how things actually should work. Okay. It floored me. It just floored me.
Yeah.
Steve, man, thank you so much. It's always great to get other perspectives, right? Again, we talked about being in our box sometimes. So it's great to see, how literally the other side of the world, how they attack this great sport of track and field, and, what their motives are and what their KPIs are. There was another one you used, KPIs. I knew that one though. That was one of the acronyms I knew. In their daily training environments, which that's going to be stuck with me forever now. I love the DTE. But it's just great to see that other aspect and that other side of it, because I think that will help our high school coaches here in America, our college coaches here in America, and then ultimately, therefore, help our athletes.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I mean, I'd just like to say to everyone that, if you're interested in any of my kind of lectures, if you Google Steve Rippon Pole Vault on YouTube, then you can see a lot of lectures I've done at European Pole Vault Conference and here in Australia and different places. So that, please feel free to have a look at the more specific stuff. If you're interested in the event specific stuff, that's great. But there's so much knowledge out there. I think it's just about, like I said, keeping your mind open and kind of always keep trying to be updated. Like I still feel like as a coach, I'm learning all the time. And we always talk about coaching is like riding a bike. If you stop pedaling, you fall over. And it's the same with coaching. If you stop learning, then you're done. You're finished. So you've got to keep updating. So I find myself now all of a sudden I've woken up and I'm an elder coach instead of a young coach. So I've got to keep trying to keep ahead of these young guys. Yeah.
Well, Steve, that's a great way to end it. I love that. Education doesn't end, right? I love the bicycle analogy. That's perfect. You stop pedaling, you fall over. So keep pedaling, keep getting yourself better, keep educating. You owe it to yourselves, you owe it to your profession, you owe it to your athletes. That's the reason you got into coaching. So Steve, man, thank you so much for being here, man. I'm just so pumped that you'd take some time. Time's the most valuable thing you can give us. And so we learned a lot today, and I'm just so appreciative.
No worries, Mike. No, it's been fun chatting, and I hope everybody enjoyed it out there, and then all the best for the future.
Well, you heard some of the athletes he coached, boys and girls. So I would immediately hit pause and go Google Steve Rippon pole vault on YouTube and start watching that. I bet you, because we don't talk the X's and O's here, so I had to hold them back. Go look at his lectures, and I bet you're going to learn some things or two on the pole vault, which probably would translate to some of your other athletes as well. So thank you for being here today. I'm just so, again, humbled that you would join us week after week as we get coaches from around the world, literally, here on the Gill Athletics Connections podcast, always trying to bring value to you as a listener. If you received value today, I'm going to go out on a limb and say someone else in your network would receive value. So So share this podcast on Facebook, Twitter. They got Facebook and Twitter in Australia. Isn't that amazing? Technology is awesome. Share with your network and give them the same value that you received today. Thanks a lot for being here, and we will see you next week. We'll do it all over again and have another awesome coach here on the podcast. See ya.